lot of things we know. We know how to make wheat into bread, how to build houses, and how to build devices that let us communicate from any distance apart. As far as science goes, we figured out how to sequence our own genome and discover what DNA really is down to each of its carbons. If you were to walk into any introductory neuroscience class, you're probably going to hear something about how complex the brain is, how much of it we don't know, but how quickly we're figuring it out, especially over the last 70 years or so. If you're in neuroscience, you'll have witnessed that speed firsthand. Because in the first neuroscience textbook I ever picked up, they estimated the amount of neurons in the brain to be about 100 billion. Now, the accepted number is more like 86 billion, and over the entire course of my degree, they've been going back and forth on whether or not mirror neurons even exist in the first place. Now, if you're to walk into another neuroscience class, maybe this one focused on cognition or philosophy, you're probably going to hear something about the hard problem of consciousness. This phrase was coined by David Chalmers in the 90s, and he has his own TED Talk on the topic. But essentially it seeks to explain how and why we experience consciousness. Now, the easy problems aren't easy, but they're tangible in the sense that for the most part we can objectively observe them, and we can come up with good scientific experiments to figure out how they work. It's questions like, if I were to put my hand out close to fire, what circuits are activating to make me pull it away? Or if I were to mess up a talk on a stage in front of a room full of people, what happens? If you hear any nerves in my voice, it's because my amygdala is wondering what the hell I did to put myself up here. And it's reacting as if I'm being chased by a bear because the human brain isn't primed to give TED Talks. But anyway, for these kinds of questions, we build maps. We form blueprints because we can put a monkey in a chair and freak it out and see what happens. And we build these maps of fear or confusion or embarrassment, or less scary things like learning and memory. And we build upon those over time. But we don't have a map for consciousness. We have a map for how we talk about it, or how we form the opinions we use to talk about it. We don't have a map for how and why we experience consciousness the way that we do. So a couple weeks at UC Berkeley, there were a couple headlines saying that they had come up with a new color called Olo. Now you can't see this color every day because the way that they got it was pointing a bunch of lasers at people's eyeballs. But to describe it, they called it like a sort of teal, blue, saturated color. And they showed a similar color in order to make you see what it looked like. The fact that they could describe it to you, but you don't actually experience it, is called qualia. Qualia is the idea that you can describe something to someone, you can make comparisons, or describe its properties, but if they've never seen it, or heard it, or smelt it, or been it, there's no way for them to actually experience what it's like subjectively. This is what you're experiencing when you're trying to describe the redness of red, or the sound of a note on a piano, or the smell of burnt toast. Qualia is one of the cornerstones of consciousness, and it's what makes the hard problem so hard. Because we really have no idea how the brain experiences the world so subjectively, so uniquely and consciously. The first time I learned about qualia was also the first time I really began to think about the things I might never know. So about a year and a half later, my friend Umal and I were sat on the floor of our school library, and we got around to discussing whether or not infinity really exists or not. I'm sure we've all done that when we were putting something off, and I did that instead of studying for my finals, and I saw the consequences on my transcript a month later. And I won't get into the details of our conversation because we're not philosophers or physicists or mathematicians, So getting into those details would probably get us blacklisted from all those communities. But what mattered about that conversation is that we're probably never going to know who's right. That's one of the maps I was talking about earlier. But humans might never know how and why we're alive, or where the universe began, or how it might end. Questions like that, I think, are uncomfortable to sit with. They feel absurd in the same way trying to imagine how small we are in a massive universe does. Or trying to imagine the idea that some infinities are bigger than other infinities, such as the infinity of all real numbers, as opposed to the infinity between 1 and 2. These questions used to really bother me. And it wasn't just the grand overarching questions, but also sadness and worry about the smaller things. Things like, I will never know everything that I want to know about the things I find interesting. Or in 100 years, science and the rest of the world will keep going, and I won't be around to see it. While this might be a niche and nerdy example, I don't think I'm alone in the general concept, because that worry manifests everywhere. From struggling to reconcile with your faith, to wondering how much time we have left, to laying in your bed and staring at the ceiling and wondering, what is this all for anyway? One of my favorite quotes is by Richard Feynman. He was a physicist who was well known for the ways he liked to write things down. The quote goes, "Atoms with consciousness, matter with curiosity." In writing this talk, I really had to figure out what my main takeaway was, what grand message I wanted to leave everyone with, because at the end of the day, not everybody cares about these grand problems. And even if you do, these grand existential questions can only be so much at the forefront of your mind when you're making everyday decisions. Things like, what am I going to do with my day? When am I going to pay my utility bill? Do I have money to pay my utility bill? When I reread that quote, I realized that if there's anything I know well, it's curiosity. There's nothing I love more in the world than to learn. Learning and knowledge has made that wheat into bread, built houses and planes, cured diseases, and brought us to space. What knowledge has never done is held us back, even when we were stood eye to eye with the most absurd things that we might never know. Erwin Schrödinger, the physicist with the cat in the box that we've heard so much about today, he didn't come up with that thought question to prove anything about quantum mechanics. He came up with it because he thought his colleagues were crazy, and he thought their ideas were so absurd that he wanted to make an experiment to show them how nuts it was. So, when he was going about his career in physics, he got so frustrated with this field and what all these people were coming up with that he switched more to the philosophical side rather than the experimental side. In the face of how difficult it was to reconcile quantum physics with the already established physics of the time, other scientists built upon his work. And now we use Schrödinger's cat as a way to teach people about quantum mechanics, not push it away. In the pursuit of the hard problem of consciousness I mentioned earlier, we've made contributions to every corner of neuroscience, to chemistry, and even to physics. So my takeaway is this: no matter what you don't know, even if it's not grand or absurd, but it still feels impossible, the pursuit of knowledge will never be punished. And I'm not just talking to neuroscientists or physicists when I say that, because the pursuit of knowledge is in everything. It's in what you want to study or your next hobby. It's in your short film or your self-portrait. And most importantly, I think, is that it's in every new person you meet. Because the very fact that we experience life so subjectively means that we have a million, almost infinite new things to tell each other, and therefore an infinite amount of things to learn. Curiosity will always bring us forward, as long as we are willing to accept the most unbelievable, seemingly impossible parts of our world, the universe, and everything in between. Thank you.